Hello, and welcome everyone to the next curated talk as part of the Art Unlocked series. My name is Deborah Hedgecock and I'm curator at Bruce Castle Museum and Archive in the London Borough of Haringey. We'd like to thank Art UK and Bloomberg Philanthropies for providing this special platform for museums and galleries to share a little more about the collections. I'll be highlighting 6 artworks from Bruce Castle. Although it's a whistle-top tour, maybe, but one that might entice you to come and visit and see some more. So first, some background to the museum. Haringey in North London is home to a castle and a palace. Many of you might know Alexandra Palace, but in the east, in Tottenham, is Bruce Castle, resplendent in 20 acres of parkland. Bruce Castle is technically not a castle, but a magnificent 16th century former manor house for Tottenham. It's Grade 1 listed and has had continuous occupation in the past 5 centuries, with aristocratic owners making their own significant and interesting architectural legacies. Amongst them was Sir William Compton, one of Henry VIII's closest courtiers. The name Bruce Castle was bestowed in the 17th century by the second Lord Coleraine. He wrote one of the first histories of the area, tracing the ownership of the manor to the medieval De Bruce family. Coleraine loved the association of his up-moded home with the historical connections of the renowned Robert de Bruce. Subsequent owners are equally fascinating and nationally important. Perhaps the most famous was Sir Rowland Hill, curator of the Penny Post. His family ran Bruce Castle from 1827 before he moved on to improve the postal system. As a school, the estate survived Victorian development and was bought by philanthropist Joshua Pedley before being purchased by the Tottenham Local Board in 1891. The grounds became Tottenham's first public park in 1892, whilst the house had to wait until 1906 to become a museum. So for over 115 years, Bruce Castle Museum and Archive has been sharing the fascinating history of the area and its communities, with local and social history, fine art, photography and archaeology collections, art in the borough's official archive. It's a place full of stories, a rich resource of heritage and creativity, with histories of innovation, migration, radicalism and resilience. Its prominent artists include Lady Diana Beauclerk, Raphaelites Arthur and Edward Robert Hughes, Beatrice Offer, cultural design icon Althea McNeish, Swansea College of Art alumni and teachers, and contemporary works by Sadie Lee, Ingrid Collins and Al Johnston. We'll move on to the next slide. Thank you. So this is the north elevation of Bruce Castle. Next slide. And here are some images from around the museum. Next slide, please. The 1686 painting of Bruce Castle here is a snapshot of 17th century life at the Tottenham Manor House, marking the end of building work to the designs of Henry Hare, the second Lord Coleraine. Here you can see him standing proudly on the central path. Henry was amongst the first in the late 1600s to commission an artist to paint in oils a view of his country house. The painting is a rare survivor, still gracing the walls of Bruce Castle, but it was almost lost to history. Art experts have been searching for the painting for decades, but it seemed to have disappeared. It was rediscovered in pieces, parceled up in the attic, and if it wasn't for the determination of art experts by John Harris, OBE, this was perhaps the determination of trying to discover where this painting was. We might have just given up. But having rediscovered it in the attic, the next decade saw an extraordinary journey of conservation. With invaluable help of the Friends of Bruce Castle and the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the last restoration of this particular painting conservation was completed by Jim Diamond in 2002. It was unveiled at a ceremony by the Duke of Somerset, and it took pride of place at Bruce Castle. Next slide, please. So here we have a detail of Lord Coleraine standing on the main pathway to Bruce Castle. It was painted by an artist called Woolridge, and that's only because that name is written on some of the engravings that survive from the 18th century that repeat the painting of Bruce Castle. And the picture on the right shows Lord Coleraine, who was one of the the Lord of the Manor at the time. He was an amateur architect. He had redesigned his house, and it was him who commissioned the oil painting of Bruce Castle. At the bottom of the picture, you can see a tiny little view of what is in fact the Hare family, or the Lord Coleraine family mausoleum. And this was a commission by Lord Coleraine of the architect Nicholas Hawksmoor, and it was attached to All Hallows Church, which is a medieval church which survives to this day just behind Bruce Castle. And unfortunately, it was destroyed and taken down during the Victorian period, when the architect William Butterfield decided to improve the local church. But here we have a man of great fashion who was trying to encourage the arts and to commission architects of the time, as well as being interested in his own designs and architecture for his new house. Next slide, please. So we move on to the next painting, which is called Auntie's Best Bonnet. And the reason why I've chosen this painting is because of its unusual title. And we shall find out a little bit more about that shortly. But the painting is by Beatrice Offer. So we're going to find out a little bit more about Beatrice Offer. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So here we have Beatrice Offer and her husband, James Bevan. He was her second husband, who she married in 1907 in Tottenham. The picture on the right, the photograph on the right, shows Beatrice Offer in her studio in Chelsea when she was newly widowed after her first marriage to William Littler, a fellow artist. And the reason why we have chosen her to be included in this particular curation because she's an artist who should be better known. In 2020, we had an exhibition at Bruce Castle to commemorate the centenary of Beatrice Offer, who had tragically died in 1920. And it was important to showcase the work and to reveal more about her paintings. There's over 40 of her works in the collections at Bruce Castle, and to make sure that her name was more widely known. She was noted to be amongst the most popular artists of her day, with paintings, prints, publications and postcards of her artwork found nowadays all the world over. In 1905, Beatrice was listed in Walter Shaw Sparrow's book called The Women Painters of the World. The book was published to prove wrong the statement that the achievements of women art painters have been second-rate. Yet, despite the public's demand for her art in the early 20th century, here we are over 100 years later, where mainly her work has largely been forgotten. But unfortunately, that is so the case for many women artists of the time. But in recent years, thanks to family members such as Anne and Ian Offer, Geraldine Beskin, and over the past 20, almost 30 years or more, and more recently by Dr. Alan Walker, we've been slowly uncovering more about the life of Beatrice Offer. And she is to be remembered as amongst the first women who trained at the Slade School of Art, exhibiting at the Royal Academy, and against the odds achieving commercial success. But as I mentioned, she died in 1920 following great tragedy. And so we lost a great light in the art world in Tottenham. So the little bit that we know about Beatrice is that she attended Tudor Hall Ladies College in Sydenham, and where she met Annie Horniman, of the local wealthy tea trading family. Both had enrolled at the Slade School of Art, and when they went there, they joined a new friend, Mina Bergson, in 1882, and the three was some of the first women to attend the college, enjoying a close friendship. Sharing an art studio in Fitzrovia with a spirited Mina until 1890, Beatrice moved into a new social and cultural world. Mina's brother was the French philosopher Henry Bergson, and by 1888, Mina had met her future husband, Samuel Liddell Mathers. He was deeply involved in the magical revival, mysticism and the occult. Mina and Annie joined Mathers as members of the newly formed Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, moving away from social conventions of the day to magical rites and occult beliefs. The equal treatment of women and men in the society offered expressions of freedom for these women not previously experienced. Beatrice was not a member of this secret society, but she was curious about the supernatural. Her first husband, the artist William Farron Littler, had experimented in spiritualism, but unfortunately he was put into an asylum through illness, and where he tragically died. So she lost her first husband. She also lost two young babies, but she managed to rebuild her life through her art, and expressed her output through the many wonderful paintings that she produced. So we're going to move on to the next slide, please, and to show some of the other paintings. Whilst she suffered tragedy from losing her first husband, she continued to draw and teach drawing. And here we have her wonderful studio, a photograph of her studio, which is in Chelsea, which showed some of the paintings crammed full in that small studio of some of the works. Going on to the next slide, please. We can see some of the paintings, because there's a great many that you can see on the Art UK website. The esoteric nature and allegorical themes of the paintings often depict, as you can see on the left-hand side, Circe, a siren, or a crystal gazer, as we have next, but also we have everyday women, we could describe as sisters, people that you might meet yourself, and also she was interested in the women who might be depicted as more saintly, as we have on the far right here, but you can explore more of her works on Art UK. Next slide, please. Going back to Auntie's best bonnet. This refers to the 1890 play Hedda Gabler by playwright Henrik Ibsen. The artist Beatrice Otto was familiar with the play, performed in London during the 1890s and 1900s. In the play, Hedda is a young woman dissatisfied with her new husband and family home. Early in the play, Hedda suggests that her husband's aunt's new hat is cheap and unattractive, revealing her contempt. Hedda tries to rekindle a relationship with a former lover, engaging in talk behind a photograph album while her husband is in the room. Fearing the loss of her youth and any scandal, Hedda tries to control the people around her, leading to distressing consequences. This painting shows Hedda with a photograph album and not a book, as many people might presume. Her stone gaze suggests frustration and disappointment with her new identity as a married woman. The painting is not of a specific actor, but is reminiscent of how the character was presented at the time. Next slide, please. So we move on to another painting in the collection, and this time it's a watercolour, a landscape. And it shows Eagle Cottage in Hornsey and painted in 1926. On the reverse of the painting is a note, presumably by the artist, which says, Mr. Brooks, Esquire, Eagle Cottage, Hornsey, Tuesday, April the 27th, 1926, 10 to 1 p.m. Mr. Brooks was a John Bunyan Brooks, an ironmonger and gas and water engineer who lived with his wife Caroline and grown-up daughter Kathleen at Eagle Cottage. The cottage was set back of the main thoroughfare in Hornsey's High Street. So Catherine was the artist, a Catherine Cornish, and she was an art teacher. As a 21-year-old, Catherine had won a Brightman Scholarship for the Royal Female School of Art for young women of the middle class to obtain an honourable and profitable employment. Her brother Edwin was an illustrator in Crouch End. And his life is easier to trace through records, but it is harder to find Catherine. We're going to move to the next slide because this shows more of Eagle Cottage, as we have here the photographs of Eagle Cottage. Next slide, please. And also some of the local newspaper reports which show the prize giving of the Royal Female School of Art, the sort of ceremony that Catherine would have attended to receive her scholarship. And on the right we have a rare photograph of the artist where she's depicted in the lower left-hand corner of 6 young women who received scholarships. Next slide, please. But just focusing still on Catherine, just for a moment. Catherine and her brother Edwin was an illustrator in Crouch End, but for him, his life is easier to trace through the records, but it's much harder to find out anything more about Catherine. So all we have to find out about her was through those local newspaper reports that we've discovered about her attending the Royal Female School of Art. But we know that she lived with her unmarried sisters, and they were all professionals. But we are thinking that they may not have owned their property, which is why they do not appear in other records. Their move to Crouch End coincided just after the First World War, when the 1918 Representation of the People Act came into force, the first time that some women over the age of 30 were entitled to vote. We don't know their views on being newly enfranchised, but it's possible that they just could not vote. It's unlikely Catherine ever had that opportunity, as 2 years later, after the painting of Eagle Cottage, Catherine sadly died in 1928. And it's looking at other women artists in our collections that we move on to this picture here, which is a landscape of Downhills Park in Tottenham with the water tower. And this was painted in 1955 by the artist Violet Fuller. And fortunately, we have some records about Violet, and because she wrote something down as a record of her art career. And she worked with and was friends with another artist who's on Art UK called Joan Knobloch. Although we don't know so much about her, we're very grateful that we have more information about Violet. Violet was born in Tottenham, and she lived there nearly all her life before she moved to Brighton towards the end of her life. And here are her words. At the time when I was bringing up in Tottenham, the area of Tottenham still had green fields. I remember going over a stile to get to Belmont School. The stile was at the top of Downhills Park near the old water tower. And here, as she has painted here in the 1950s, that water tower, although no longer there, is obviously something that was really an everyday familiar view, as well as something that she wanted to record. Next slide, please. And here she is with her father on the left-hand side, much later in her art career, about 1980, portraying some other of her paintings that are not in our collection, but at Bruce Castle. And on the right is another local view that she drew in pastels of Tottenham High Road. Next slide, please. And this is another painting by Violet of Southwood Lane in Highgate, which shows more of the type of paintings that she was known for, the landscapes, which were often full of melancholy, sometimes quite dark, but she was very focused on portraying light and dark. And if you compare the next slide with her friend Joan Knobloch, you can see that they probably went out to Highgate and possibly painted together, taking in the views of the area, as they were known to be part of different art clubs in the area. But going back to Violet, she had a real interest in the countryside, which is why, in her words, she started painting landscapes in watercolour as well as oils with some more detailed work. When she was in London, she was mainly interested in painting people in her early childhood, and she was encouraged to draw and paint by her parents. Her father even painted in his spare time, and he was a craftsman, a French polisher of pianos by trade, and had a great pride in his work. But the war intervened, and the family moved out of London, and she began to work as a tracer in animation films, something that she did up to the year 1969. But when she returned to London, she continued working as a tracer, but she was back in London at the time of the early 1950s, which was a very exciting time, and many things were getting going after the war years. And this is where the new groups are being formed. And she was very proud to be a founder member of two art groups. One was the Free Painters and Sculptors, formed by a group of members of the Institute of Contemporary Art. The other group was more local, the Tottenham Art Group, first known as the Tottenham Art Circle, where they met locally in different houses and different venues. But she started having, as she called, man shows, starting in 1958 at the Woodstock Gallery in London, which was in Mayfair. And that was that her particular exhibition was one that she was one of the very first people to actually exhibit there. So here we have someone who is quite, maybe a simple life in art, but somebody who was quite pioneering at the time in the 1950s. And she was very keen to make sure that her artwork was shared and part of public collections. And so she exhibited wherever she could. Her landscapes were bought by individuals and private collectors, but they were also used commercially, it seems. And in 1967, a painting of the Silent Valley, the Mountains of Mourne, was published in an advert alongside with her photograph, and was in the Illustrated London News to promote what was known as the Shells Countryside Books, encouraging folk to take to their car and explore the British Isles. Next slide, please. And here we have, we're moving back in time to a very early painting that we have in our collections at Bruce Castle, that is very likely the oldest painting that we have. And it shows Lucius and Montague Hare, the younger sons of Henry Hare, the second Lord Coleraine of Bruce Castle. And it shows them with an African servant. The painting dates to about 1675 to 1680. And it would have once have been displayed, not in a frame, but in the oak panelling that would have been part of the interior design of the 17th century Bruce Castle. The young man on the right is seen in very exotic clothing, and what is important to note is that he wears a silver collar around his neck. This denotes the fact that he has come here because of the slave trade. He's unnamed, as most young men who were brought to Britain because of the slave trade. And it's a poignant and stark reminder of Britain's entrenchment in the transatlantic slave trade. This painting is one of 50 similar paintings that were made in Britain between 1660 and 1760. In 2007, Bruce Castle Museum worked with visual orator Akusia Bambara and elders from the Haringey University of Third Age to explore and better understand the history of this painting and to make more transparent its complex history. The painting is displayed alongside the resulting artwork that the group explored called Redefining Haringey, and it's a legacy of the bicentennial commemorative year of the abolition of the British slave trade in 2007. So this painting is a very rare painting and is very important to show the early presence of young Black men such as this young man, and also reflects a visual record of the presence, which backs up a lot of references in written records as well that are known to predate this painting, but it's an important record for the history of Bruce Castle to show the complex history, as I say, of the transatlantic slave trade and the wealth that families such as the Hares would have had, and possible investment in the East Indian, the Royal African Society and East Indian Company. Next slide, please. Moving on to the last painting that I've chosen, and it's one of the more recent acquisitions that we have amongst our collections at Bruce Castle. It's a self-portrait by a true friend of Bruce Castle called Ruth Hutchinson. It's a self-portrait, and what the title suggests, a little bit of me, myself and I. As it suggests, it's all about Ruth. And here's what she actually had to say about it and herself. And this is what Ruth said. I was born in Jamaica and came to England in 1959. It was only meant to be for 4 years to train as a nurse. In those days, we trained on the job. Over 60 years on, and after a rewarding career working in early years and nurseries, I'm still living here in Haringey. I always wanted to go to university, but just didn't have the opportunity. I've always loved art, museums, poetry and gardening, indulged myself as much as I could around my jobs and family. As soon as I retired, I went to the local Tottenham Technical College and met a very nice art teacher who just didn't take no or can't do for an answer and really helped me along. One of the things I had to do was a self-portrait. It was a complex process, first of all drawing myself using a mirror, and then building up the layers of colour and applying fabric paint with a roller. I decided to concentrate on the style of Henry Matisse, as I like bright colours. I wanted to show as much of my character as possible in the portrait, building up the layers of meaning. I'm a self-made woman with an individual sense of style. I wear lots of bright colours, often topped off with a hat, but there's no hat here. For my self-portrait, I wanted to show myself with a non-conventional, even intimidating hairstyle with lots of spikes sticking above my hairband. This is a hallmark hairstyle of mine. My reddish purple hair, instantly recognisable as Rebel Ruth, reminding people of my activism and campaigning. I've incorporated the colours of my family home of Jamaica, the green, the yellow. I've used deep red with a leaning towards purple, my favourite colour, and also reflects my own Christian faith. The choice of blue remembers my best friend Dave. It was his favourite colour. He was the most cherished and dearest friend you could ever wish for. We spoke every day, first thing in the morning and last thing at night. And I saw him most days too, enjoying being there and doing things together. I miss him enormously. When it comes to another dear friend, my local museum at Bruce Castle, I wanted to give something in return for all the pleasure it's given me. My donation, a little bit of me, my self-portrait. And I felt this is an important note to end on. We may all have a little bit of history about someone in our collections, and all these will live on beyond a lifetime, telling their story. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed the display of some of the paintings from Bruce Castle. Thank you. Here's a picture of Ruth, just to end on here.